If you adopt these 5 things into your comic creation process, you will make a better comic and you'll enjoy the process a lot more too. So let's not waste any time and get straight onto that first one. Character reference the right way. Look, I'm going to say it because nobody else has the balls to say it. Doing character references is boring, especially if you've got a lot of characters in your comic. Drawing the same types of poses, looking forwards, looking to the side, the 3/4 view, the back view, the top-down view, it gets pretty tedious pretty quickly. You want to draw your characters striking cool poses and punching the bad guy in the dick, not standing around like mannequins. But for the longest time, I thought that the proper way to do character references is to draw them in T-poses and line all of the references up so that they each match, something like this. But unless you're going to turn that into a 3D model, you don't have to do that. And not only do you not have to do that, you really shouldn't. The reason why that you shouldn't do this, other than the fact that it gets quite boring, is because of a huge mistake that comic creators make when they're designing their characters. And that is that they design the characters for the pose rather than for movement. What I mean by that is that your character design might look awesome when your characters are looking straight forwards or to the side, but what about when they move? What do they look like when they're running or jumping or crouching down? Does the design work in those poses? Is it even possible for you to draw the design in those poses? And have you accidentally added in way too many details for your characters, so it's going to take you 400 years to draw your comic? Well, if you just draw T-poses, then you won't necessarily know the answer to those questions until after you started your comic. Look, don't get me wrong, doing a standing pose is really helpful for dressing your characters. But once you've figured that out, draw them running and jumping and crouching and just moving in a way that they would in the comic. That way you get to decide whether your designs actually work in a practical way. Do your characters really need 1,000 accessories, or is one fine? And if you're struggling to answer that question, less is almost always more. Character references are one of those things that needs to be done before you start your comic, but it can also feel like a chore to do, especially when you've got a giant cast of characters. Believe me, I understand. Right now, I really want to be working on my comic, but I'm still in pre-production because I know it's going to be worth it in the long run. And if I just did T-poses for my characters, like this one, this one, this one, these ones, and this one, and these, then I'd cry myself to sleep every night. So when you're doing your character references, make sure to have fun and make sure to test your designs through movement. Make this process come alive, because then they're going to feel more alive when you actually draw them in your comic. Break your comic into seasons. Originally, this entry was going to be do a 6-page comic first, but I've said that for a while and you're probably not going to listen anyway. So you've got your comic that you've been thinking about for years and it needs to be 300 pages long, regardless of what I say. And you know what, Zack Snyder, that is fine. You've beat me down, and yes, fine, draw your way too long comic. But if you are going to do that, then at least break it into seasons. And I mean TV seasons, not weather seasons. However many seasons you have is entirely up to you, but there are 2 main key things to consider. There's one consideration for you and one consideration for your audience. The key consideration for you is to make sure that your 300-page epic is a much more manageable 20 or 30 or 40-page single season. 30 or 40 pages is easily a year's worth of work, and that is plenty for you to sink your teeth into. And the consideration for your audience is to ensure that there is some sort of closure at the end of each of your seasons. This might require a little bit of a rewrite if you've just written your entire script to be a 300-page long story, but it's worth it in the long run. Now, chances are you haven't written the entire 300 pages because a lot of people start a comic and kind of write it as they go. You don't have to have written the entire thing in order to start, although it does help. But at the very least, write a full season before you start, so you know that there is a start point and an end point. This is just going to make the entire book a lot easier for you to manage. Plus, if you decide to go on hiatus or you just don't want to do it anymore, there's at least a little bit of closure for your audience as well, rather than stopping halfway through before any sort of resolution. Now, how you end each season, again, is up to you. It's going to depend on your story, but here are some ideas for you. So a cliffhanger, a character death, a new area discovered, a revelatory new piece of information that the characters find out are all really good options to end your season on. And what this does is it increases the excitement within your audience for the next season. That's why you want to leave them on a high. This also has an added bonus of adding some momentum to your comic and anticipation as you take the audience on that ride. Now, my proper advice for this entry is to take your 300-page epic and trim that down as much as you possibly can, because 300 pages is extremely big for a comic, especially if you don't have that much experience and especially if you're doing everything yourself. But I understand that most people don't like to do that or don't want to do that. So if nothing else, break it into seasons. Just make it more manageable for yourself. Not only will you find it easier to create it and you'll enjoy it more, but your audience will end up enjoying it more as well. You are the custodian of your comic. This follows on from the logic of the previous entry. You are the custodian of your comic. That means that you're responsible for nurturing it and feeding it and teaching it until you release it into the world. It is essentially your child, and you are the parent of your comic. And you birth them onto the world. That was weird. But what that really means is that you need to take care of yourself. There's still this mentality out there that you need to mortgage your health for your art, and it still pisses me off. If you tell me that you work on your comic for like 8, 9, 10 hours a day and you get like 4 hours sleep, then like Shania Twain, I'm going to be rather unimpressed by that. I'm certain that's the song and I will not look it up. Working for hours and hours and hours at a time on your comic doesn't make you more committed or more passionate. It doesn't mean that you want it more than other people. It's not a badge of honor. It just makes you short-sighted and kind of dumb. Sorry, but it does. If you want to be a comic creator, you're going to be making comics pretty much forever until you decide to stop. And although we may look like it, especially me, we're not pro athletes. So it's not like we have a short window to work on our career. We can be comic creators until we're in our 90s, but you're not going to have a good time with that if your spine is misaligned and you've got multiple injuries and you're mentally exhausted by pushing yourself beyond your limits. The only way that you're going to create good comics and improve upon your comics every time you make them is by taking care of yourself. If that means that you have to postpone your comic by a month or even a year, that is worth it, especially if the alternative is damaging yourself physically or mentally. That's a trade never worth taking. Not only will it mean that you won't last that long in this game, but the quality of your comic is going to take a dramatic hit if you are not physically and mentally okay. And look, I get it. Modern life feels like a race. Everything moves really, really fast, and everyone's got this mentality that they've got to go fast. So I sympathize with the need to push yourself faster and faster and further in order to get your comic done quicker, because other people seem to be racing past you. But it's not going to work out like you think it will. Long-term gains beat short-term gains every single time. So take care of yourself, even if that means taking a step back, because then you'll be able to move several steps forwards. And for the sake of a cheap plug, I've got a thumbnail course coming out. If you want to know more about it, then click the link in the description below and I'll give you some more information about what it's about. I just thought I'd crowbar that in here. Back to the video. Simplicity solves everything. Seriously, it does. This was a really tough lesson for me to understand because I ran into the trap that most of us do. We look at our favorite comic artists and we think, how hard can that be? And we decide to make a comic like the ones that we like. Then we find out how hard it can be and we either start again or we try and brute force our way through it. And then we end up starting again anyway. Maybe that's just my experience, but if you've gone through something similar, then comment the word same in the comments to make me feel not quite so lonely. It'll make me feel seen. So what does simplicity mean? It's a pretty vague term without proper context. The first is simplicity in character design. We've already sort of touched upon this, but I'm going to go into a bit more detail here. Guns and pouches on guns are cool. Nobody is denying that. Awesome tattoos and bangles and frilly bits coming off our characters' outfits are also really cool. But are those things going to make your character more memorable? No. Are they going to be an absolute arse to draw over and over and over again? Hell yeah. So in order to get the characters to where you want them to be, stop thinking about the cool accessories and start thinking about cool silhouettes. Simple silhouettes are the thing that make characters memorable, not earrings and tattoos and guns and other stuff. I've recommended them before on this channel and I'll do it again, but I really recommend you watch BAM Animation's video on this. I'll link to that in the description as well, because they do a better job of explaining the power of silhouettes more than I could. The second thing to think about in terms of simplicity is your story. This might be controversial because I understand that people are protective of their stories, and I totally get that. But like with our character designs, we often get carried away and distracted by the amount of details that we add into our story. We like to explore the culture or the law or the politics or the history of the worlds that we create, and that is awesome. But does it belong in the story that you're currently telling? I'd argue no, but before you get mad, let me explain. I'm not saying that you shouldn't explore those things and develop this rich lore for your story, because you should, because it's fun. But the goal of storytelling is to tell a story in a concise way that doesn't meander too much. And you can have your cake and eat it too, where you've got a rich world and a concise story. Here's an example of what I mean. Keep your story relatively basic and easy to follow without adding in 1,000 years worth of history for your audience to learn. But then you can produce a history book that satellites your comic but is not featured within the main story. Perhaps this follows the origin of one of your main characters or tells you about the world before the world that we understand it today. Or you can dive into the history of a race that you've invented, or the politics or the culture or whatever it is that you're interested in. You can go full on, really nerdy on that stuff. But keep your story lighter in comparison to that. Because the fans of your story are going to want to eat that up and they're going to want to know about the world and the history. But the general audience, your main audience, perhaps are not. And the intense historical stuff that you add in to bolster out your lore might be something that turns them away from the comic in the first place. Plus, think about it this way. You're using your relatively basic story as the pitch for the lore. So people are going to want to read your story because it's easy to follow and the characters are really memorable because you use good silhouettes. And that's going to make them want to know more. And that's what this is for. The other advantage you have is that you can use this, the history stuff, the lore stuff, as a way to upsell with your comic. So you can sell the basic comic for, say, $5 or $10, and the basic comic with the lore for $15. Maybe you can add that as an extra tier for a Kickstarter campaign or a new tier for Patreon to get access to that. So that's how you can have your cake and eat it too. You keep your story relatively basic and easy to follow, but then go ham on the nerdy stuff that satellites around the comic. I hope that made sense. Word balloons are more important than your art. What matters more, the art or the writing? The answer is both, but the reason I'm calling this entry "Word balloons are more important than your art" is because word balloons get shunned to the side by so many artists that we need to give them a bit more love and attention. Most new comic creators especially figure out the art first and the word balloons way too late. Well, stop that. Stop it. Instead, do them both at the same time. Consider your word balloons as part of the art process, not as part of the writing process. They are as important, if not more important, than the art. The reason why should be obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway, just for the sake of clarity. Why would you spend so much time and energy figuring out the art, figuring out where the characters are going, rendering them all out, only to realize that the word balloons don't fit, so you have to redraw everything all over again? Why would you do that? Or spend all that time only to realize that the word balloon fits, but the tail is not going to reach the character's mouth unless you do something like that to get it to reach? That's not great, and that's just going to ruin all of the work that you've done. So give your word balloons the love and attention that they deserve, or they will ruin the art for you. Remember, bad art will not ruin a comic, but bad word balloons will. So when do you figure out the word balloons then? Well, you do it while you're thumbnailing. Did I mention I have a thumbnailing course? The thumbnailing course also comes with a supplementary word balloon guide as well. So if you struggle with word balloons in general, then that's going to really help you. Remember, the link to that is in the description below. And if you sign up with my email, you'll get the early bird pricing. That's only going to last a week, so do it now, and then by the time it's out, you'll get first dibs. Anyway, if you adopt at least one of those 5 things, then it will make your comic better and you'll have an easier time making it. And if you want to see 3 awesome comics from my community, then click the video on screen now.